Thank you so much, Karen, for joining the We Don't Play podcast show today. How are you?
I'm doing well, Favor. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I got to give a great shout out to our amazing friend, Julie. We had an amazing connection and we got to meet here last week on Creative Con, and now getting to connect with you and see what you're doing for the world. It's just astonishing. I was like, there's no way my audience will not want to listen to this, because knowing your story and learning from you shows a lot of boldness and character, which a lot of people struggle with. So you being on here, I'm excited that you're here with us today, and I'd love people to know about you and just a brief history and background of, how all this started for you.
Well, I'm a lawyer, and I've been a lawyer for 37 years, and I had an interesting experience as a very young lawyer. So for your listeners who may not remember history dating back in the 1970s, but in Chicago, there was a serial killer named John Wayne Gacy, who was arrested in 1979, and they found 27 young boys and men buried under his house, and an additional 4 thrown in the river. He was an evil serial killer. He was the most prolific serial killer at that time. He was arrested and tried and sentenced to death. Now, at that time, I was in high school. So flash ahead 14 years, I'm now graduate of college, graduated from law school. I've been a lawyer for a few years. And the call came in from John Gacy's people, and they wanted us to come down, me and my law partner, to meet John Gacy to handle some legal issues that he had. So at that point in my career, I had never handled a death penalty case. I had never handled a crime of this magnitude. I certainly never thought I'd be on death row or staring face to face with the most prolific serial killer in the history of the country. So my story starts with going down 6.5 hours south. Illinois is a long state, so you go all the way down south. You're almost where Nashville or Memphis, I guess, is. So you're real far south on the Mississippi River. And I met John Gacy in the death row bullpen, along with a bunch of other killers walking around freely there. And it was quite an experience. And as a result of that meeting, Gacy hired me and my law partner to represent him in his final death row appeals.
Wow. Just tell us a little bit, how did you feel as you were driving? Like, what were the thoughts going through your mind that whole drive?
Well, interestingly, like a lot of people, I was a true crime buff. So I loved watching all of the shows. I loved the Jack the Ripper and all of those types of killer stories. I just am fascinated by the psychopathic mind, how people become that way, why they become that way. And so I had read all the books on Gacy, and so I knew a lot about him. And I had the book with me while my partner was driving, and we were kind of going over what had happened and what his MO was and how he got caught and what happened at trial, and some about the victims and how he was a predator, a true predator. And so there was a lot of anticipation. There was a lot of curiosity. And that's something that I'd like to talk with you and your listeners about. The idea of being curious has always been something that is a big part of my personality. And so that turned out to be a really good thing for me, because a lot of people probably wouldn't have made that drive, not getting paid, not knowing what's going on, maybe being a little frightened of going on to death row, which is not a safe place, one of the worst prisons in the country. So I was not really fearful, but I was nervous for what was going to happen and how protocol was going to be. Prisons are very, like I said, dangerous places, and there, you don't have much control over how you're treated there by the guards and by the prisoners. But generally, the prisoners want you there because they want you to help them. They want you to help the prisoner you're there to see, but they also are hoping that maybe you could help them too. So generally, the prisoners are not really dangerous, but the guards can let things happen where you feel very physically exposed. So there was some nervous anticipation, I would say.
Wow. That's bold, honestly, because I feel like the the way you have shown, and when they see you, it's like your body gesture, body language, how you're presenting yourself and how they're also perceiving you, because you're trying to think what they're thinking and they're trying to think what you're thinking. So it's like a game of war going on with mind reading as well. Now, when you look at the story that you've had and the journey getting there, connecting with them, did you ever think that this would be something in your career that would happen? Or did it just happen and then you're like, okay, I'm going to take this opportunity and run with it?
I never thought it would happen. I never started out, in law school thinking I wanted to do criminal defense work, although I enjoyed the classes because they're very interesting. About, why is someone culpable? What's the insanity defense? What's aiding and abetting? What should punishment be? Those are all really fascinating topics, but I just never thought in practice that I would do that. So to get this call and to get the opportunity to represent, the person who is tagged with the most murders in a case that is impossible, that doesn't happen. It's funny, you use the word bold, and maybe I was a little reckless, maybe a little naive, because there's a thin line between bold and maybe reckless. I just didn't think about the consequences when I did it. All I thought was, this is an important situation. And when I say important, I don't mean that Gacy is an important person. I do not mean to put him on a pedestal, because he is a person who's committed the most vile acts of almost anyone I've ever heard of. But it was important in that the death penalty is something I have never believed in, even before law school. I've been adamantly opposed to it for anyone, including Gacy. And so I knew that by taking on this representation, I wasn't just advocating for him. I was advocating for all of the people on death row who may have had actual innocent defenses, or they may have been treated in a racist manner, or they may have had poor legal counsel because they were poor. So all of the arguments that I was making and all of the advocacy was going to the benefit, in my view, of not only Gacy, but people on death row in Illinois and people on death row everywhere. So I thought it was very important, but no, I never thought ever that I would be in this situation.
I feel like it was just a godsend moment for you, because that's where you get to see your true, style, because that way, if somebody could do that, like you said, bold, reckless, if somebody looks at that picture, they're like, okay, how can I fit in to something like this, that it's daring, but it's also something that could be rewarding at the end. Now, so
here's, in favor, I think it's a good thing for your listeners. See, and I'm looking back now all these years, right? So when you're going through it, it's all around you. But now when I look back, I thought to myself, people really need to understand, when you said God sent or whatever the words you used, sometimes you're handed things and I see people turn them down because, oh, I don't have time. It's not in my comfort zone. I don't really think I'd be good at doing this. And again, that's not to say that you should say yes to everything that comes at you, because if it's harmful to you or something that you're incompetent to handle, but always really consider when something's handed to you like that, just a fluke, right? Just a coincidence, really think about it. Don't say no, like err on the side of saying yes. And the curiosity gets you those experiences. And then by saying yes, then you get to take those experiences and do the best you can with them.
I love that. That's like a characteristic builder in its own way, because, the characters that you're creating within those episodes are also showing different sides of you that possibly some people are not able to see until something happens. Because it's like when you push somebody to the wall, that's when you really know what they can do. So in this case, it's like now somebody's listening and they're wondering, okay, if she could do it, I can do it. Whatever I'm doing in my world, it can work because someone else did it in their own way, so I can do it my way too.
I think people put themselves, I call it a shelf. People put themselves on a shelf. And I only am this person on a shelf. I'm only a lawyer who does civil work. I don't represent people on death row. I don't take on big challenges. I'm just a lawyer who does this. So you put yourself on that shelf, but you don't have to be on that shelf, And I think other people can put you on the shelf. Even the people who love you, like your family. I mean, how many of the listeners out there want to morph away from their job that they have now and do something more creative, excuse me, or more fulfilling? And their family's like, hey, but you're a good teacher, but you're really good at IT. You're really good. So why would you want to do anything else? They want to keep you on that shelf, not because they don't care about you, because that's how they think of you. But when you know that you've put yourself there, you can think about jumping off that shelf once in a while.
Exactly. How would you tell someone in that position who is contemplating on jumping or even flying, but it's like their wings are being cut off by the people that they love the most, but they can't really express to them because they can't see it until you're on the other side?
That's a really good question. I think what you need to do is surround yourself by people who want to see you fly. And like I said, sometimes your own spouse doesn't want you to write that book or to do something else because they want you to do what you've always done. They want you to be consistent. And so it's not to say that you're going to, get divorced or something. I'm not saying that, but surround yourself with people who see in you your ability to succeed and who will encourage you. And at one point in my life, I had a group of 4 or 5 women, and we weren't the best of friends, but we would get together once in a while and say, hey, how are you doing on this project that you're working on? How are you doing on, morphing off into doing more media? Oh, I have an opportunity for you. I'm going to connect you with somebody. So it was sort of like a networking kind of cheerleading kind of meeting. And I found that it was really helpful to be surrounded by people who could see your vision. But I would also say that you don't have to jump off. I mean, you can keep your day job and then start to work on the idea of moving yourself. So, maybe it's going to take some evenings where you're not watching television, or some Saturday mornings that you wake up early and you start to look into who can help me, who in my networking group, I hate word networking, that my social group, who can help me? I know somebody who wrote a book, or I know somebody who's in publishing. And then really get good at something. If you want to have a podcast like Favor, don't just put on the video. Do the research, read the book, understand your grammar, understand how to interview somebody in a really good way. Watch good interviewers. Watch the people on 60 Minutes. I mean, those people know how to interview, and learn your craft while you're preparing for that jump off.
I love that. Thank you so much for that feedback, because I believe a lot of people are always looking out for people that they look up to, but most times they just look and they're kind of blinded by the fame, by the lights, and they're not looking at the questions or the nitty-gritties or how they even dressed or what they say when they show up, when they get the microphone. What's the first thing they say? What's the last thing they say? People don't look at that. They're just awed. They're in awe of everything around them, but they don't really look at the intricacies as well.
I've said this a million times in my life. I'm never going to be the best looking. I'm never going to be the smartest or most articulate, but I can be the most prepared. And when Gacy was handed to me, I did all my research on the death penalty. I had all the facts and figures. I memorized them. I went to a PR firm and said, how do I do my hair? How do I do my makeup? What do I wear so I look good on set? What is the makeup you use so you don't look like you're sweating? How do you speak in sound bites for radio, which is different than how you speak on television? And I learned those things. And not only did I become proficient at doing those kinds of events, I became confident, because I knew that there was nothing more I could do to prepare myself. I had done my homework. And when you know that you've done everything you can do to prepare, you can relax and enjoy it and be persuasive and be engaging and entertaining and educating and all those good things.
I love that. Now you got me thinking about one question that came to mind. When you met John Gacy for the first time in person, in a room, what was the energy like for you, and what would you say the energy felt like as far as like receiving and also giving?
Well, Gacy did not appear to be evil, and that shouldn't surprise your listeners, because a person who's good at being a predator does not appear to be creepy or evil. They appear to be like your favorite uncle or a bus driver, just like an everyday guy, right? He was engaging, he was charming, He was glib. And although when someone spends time in prison, and I've spent a lot of time with people who have been in prison, there's a sense of being what I call institutionalized, where there's a real lack of emotion. That's partly because he's a sociopath and doesn't have true emotion, but the prison world and prison life takes a lot out of you because you're constantly worried about being injured. You're constantly worried about, protecting your stuff, protecting your body. There's a lot of rules. So it takes away the warmth. If you have any warmth in you to begin with, it takes that away. And so I saw that emptiness in Gacy's eyes. And I could see that how engaging he probably was before he went into prison and why he got away with what he did.
Mm. So it's like putting a mask on, and not even to the extent of even getting to that point, but even in general, when people show up on social media or they show up in person or they show up at an event, it's like that picture you get of them is the only picture that you have. And most people say like first impression creates a lasting impression. But in this case, it's a little bit counterintuitive because you already know what you're getting into, but you have to like beat the face value and surpass the emotion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that when you read about being a sociopaths look at people as means to an end. They don't care about you. They can never care about you. They have no ability to have any true affection, really, or empathy, or sympathy, or connection. So they look at you and they try to figure out, how can I get this person to do something that will benefit me? Gacy looked at young men that way, unfortunately. I'm sure he was trying to manipulate me right from the beginning, for whatever reason he had in his head. It's instinctive with them. It's not like they plan it out, but he gets to know you. He asks you questions. If you think of the Hannibal Lecter movie, asking questions, knowing what your background was, because then he can use it to either make you feel guilty or to coerce you into a place where he wants you to go. And so even though you're having a normal exchange with a person who appears to be normal, this is not a normal exchange. This is a pre-planned program, if you will, to get me to do what he wanted.
Wow. Now that I'm thinking about this now too, it's like from what you even said too when you spoke, it's like you already know what's going to happen, but you also want to defend what's happening and see if you could fight for the case, because most people were like, but you already knew the results, so why would you do that? But for you had your reasons, and your reasons are valid because that's what you wanted to show people, that hey, this is who I am. In that case, how did you portray that, by keeping the negative thoughts outside and keeping the positive thoughts inside?
Well, that's a good point, because if there's any case that you're going to lose, it's going to be John Gacy, right? So even for people who are against the death penalty or were against the death penalty at the time, they still said, well, there's a Gacy exception. He should be executed. I mean, I heard the most outspoken opponents of capital punishment say that. So yes, it was a losing battle. But here's how I looked at it. I looked at it as public opinion drives whether capital punishment is used. So for instance, right now, with our young generation who are a little more woke, or whatever that word is you want to use, they're not in favor of capital punishment. They don't like it. And so the public opinion is at an all-time low right now. And how does that reflect itself? About 23 or 4 states have either stopped using it, abolished it, or basically have a moratorium on it. So half of our country is not really using it. We only had 25 executions last year, which was an all-time low. So I think what I thought was this: if I can change public opinion, obviously I can't do that myself, but if I can move the needle a little bit, even just a little bit, by making my argument, saying throw them in jail, it's much more of a punishment. It's cheaper to throw them in jail and not execute them, and the statistics are there. There's no deterrent effect. It's used in a racially abhorrent way. And so you make those arguments, and slowly people may change their mind. Illinois abolished the death penalty in 2011. I'm not saying I had anything to do with that, but every little bit counts. And I knew that if I could speak, not in a preachy way or like I'm smarter than you. No, just here's the practical parts of the death penalty, and then make up your own mind. I'm not going to tell you how to think. I don't like people telling me how to think, but at least I can give them facts and have them make up their own mind.
Love that. That's the resilience right there. It's like building up tenacity in the middle of a storm, but you know that you'll get out of it better because you learned from it. That's good. Wow. I'm just thinking through different, like the episodes that you were in, from the beginning, from the road, from the drive, all the way to the final end, going through this case, continuously. By the time you were getting closer to the end, what was your mind thought process like? Was it like, finally? Or was it like, okay, what's the next one? What was that striking balance for you?
I had extreme anxiety because even though I knew the inevitable was going to happen, he was under my watch. I was his lawyer. So, it's hard. It may be easy for someone else to say, well, you knew he was going to die, so that wasn't a problem. That's not the way I thought of it. I mean, I thought I was responsible, and I was responsible up until the minute he was pronounced dead. I was trying to save his life. That was my job. I didn't do it, but I do know he, along with the other lawyers who helped represent him along the way, we all did a really good job of zealously advocating for him. And that's all you can ask for in our system. I can't make justice. I'm just one piece in it. If everyone does their job well, prosecutors, police put the evidence together, the jurors, are impartial, then usually justice gets done. And I did my piece, but I will tell you, it made me very, very anxious to lose a human life. Anyone, I don't care who it is, I don't care what he did. He was a human being. I knew his family, I knew his friends, I knew all about his upbringing, and I didn't want to see him executed.
That's deep. I believe now that looking at everything and seeing, now we're in the future, looking at what has happened, it's a big, story. A lot of people still learn about it. People are still growing and saying, okay, now I understand, now I know what happened. Then they go do more research. On your end, you're on the receiving end, because everybody is talking about it on the papers. Everybody's talking about it on the socials. They're talking about it on, wherever they have conversations and forums. But on your end, it's like you were in the room, so you know what really happened at the same time. So now that the whole case, was ended, and now you're in a position to really show that, hey, I can help you as well. What was one lesson you can say from the beginning of the process through the end of the process that you felt like, this is what I've gained from it, and this is what other people can learn from it?
Well, I think I learned that I knew that I was standing up for what I thought was right. My moral compass said that executing is wrong. And I stood up for that, and I did it proudly, and I did it in a prepared way, and I did it in a compassionate way. And I think that I'm glad I did that. I mean, that is probably the only time I got to ever do that in such a public forum with so many people looking and watching. And I was handed that opportunity because of a sociopathic, evil serial killer who dressed up as a clown. I was associated with this horrible person. But what I did, and I don't know how I did it or why I did it, it sort of was instinctive with me, is to take it on a higher level and use it as a springboard, a calling card to forward what my moral beliefs told me was the right thing to do. And I'm glad I did that. I'm really, really glad I did that. And it made me more resilient. And I know we're going to talk about it later, but I have written a book called Killing Time with John Wayne Gacy that's going to be published next month in March. And in my book, I talk about the public outrage. I mean, I had death threats. I still have death threats. I had a bomb threat in my office. I had people would mail me things that were horrible. I had friends that didn't want to talk to me. I had a judge who would like take me in chambers and like admonish me and say, "Let the guy die. What are you doing? You're not acquitting yourself well. This whole system makes lawyers look bad." Like, a judge should know that I was doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and even the judge was against me. So, and I knew that standing up in light of all of that outrage made me a much stronger person. You really have a hard time insulting me now. I mean, you can say whatever you want. I've already heard it all. So, it makes it roll right off my back, which is refreshing.
I love that. It's like you got tough skin from the process, and now like the new skin now is way better. It's shinier. People can appreciate it.
Has a few more wrinkles, but but we won't talk about that. Oh. You can Photoshop this, right?
Just a little bit. No, but this is amazing. I love it. This is such an amazing time to be, learning new things and growing and hearing from experiences like this, because the stories that we hear every day are stories that are unique, right from your grandmother telling you stories to your child telling you a story. You're always in that act of listening. So even as listeners are listening to this too, and they heard your book, they're like, "Oh, okay, let's hear more about that." If somebody is looking forward to reading this book, what mindset? How you open pages, you're like, "Okay, nice time to read." What kind of mindset should they be prepared with, so that when they're taking in those words or they're processing them, they can not just look at it from the bigger picture, but from the little steps that led to that big picture?
Well, I think my book, I originally, I waited 30 years to write it. So his execution was 30 years ago in May. So it took me a long time to write it, and there are many reasons for that. But I think that your listeners, if they read Killing Time with John Wayne Gacy, it's true crime for sure, because I talk a little bit about, what got him into prison. I talk about his psychological background, his family background. I maintained friendships with his family, and they gave me some insights into his upbringing that may have caused him to become what he became. I also, though, talk about my journey and the idea that I was treated way differently because of my gender. There's just no question during the course of this and in my career in general. And I have a few stories. I argued before the United States Supreme Court, and I was singled out by Sandra Day O'Connor, the first and at that time the only female on the court. And I was singled out pretty sure because of my gender. So even women, treated me different and not so nice during the process. So there's stuff about Gacy, true crime, about being a woman, being a minority in a man's field, how to deal with criticism, how you can take something kind of bad that happened and then turn it around and use it in a positive sense. And so it's about loss too. There's some, idea that Gacy, it was a loss of a case. It was a loss of a human being. His family was grieving for years and still grieves. And it's about a lot of things. So if you like true crime, if you like legal stuff, if you like capital punishment, prison stories, but also there's some positive, inspirational things in there that I think your listeners will find.
Oh yeah, totally. I believe so too. When you're writing or you're an author, you're a podcaster, a musician, you always have a soft spot for an episode or for a chapter. Would you say you have anything like that for this book? Would you say like this is like my piece of gold is within the whole chapters within the book?
It's probably not what people would think, but I have a chapter about a recurring dream that I have. I never dream about Gacy. I never have. But it was the last victim that Gacy killed. That was the reason that Gacy was caught. And it was a horrible story. The beautiful, handsome 15-year-old kid goes into a store while his mother waits outside to apply for a job with a man in construction who was going to pay him double hourly wage. Kid was motivated. He wanted to save for college. He goes in there and he never comes out. And within an hour, Gacy took him, abducted him into his home, sexually abused him, and killed him. And I have a recurring dream about Robert Piest. And I kind of talk about my dream. And I realized when I was writing it that he would be my same age right now. He probably had grandchildren. And so I really am fond of that chapter because I just talk about my reflections. Again, I didn't represent victims. I have represented victims in all kinds of things, but in this case, that wasn't my focus. I was focused on the defendant. But I did think a lot about the victims and the families, and I think that's a very meaningful chapter.
Wow. I can't wait. I can't wait to get my hands on this book. I feel like it's going to be those revealing moments, like you said, 30 years. So it's like 30 years in chapters that somebody has to tell you is something that even the person reading is like, wow, this is really real. This is really life. This is really happening. So I can't wait. I'm sure they can't wait as well. I'm sure they're also wondering, okay, Faber, why don't you ask her where it's going to be available so that they can find it?
Faber, why don't you ask where it's going to be available? You can go on Amazon right now for pre-order, and you can pre-order the Kindle version. So probably in about 3 weeks, you can go on and pre-order the paperback version, and then it will be out on March 26th. And I also dictated the audio book, and that'll be out probably a little bit, maybe into April.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. I can't wait.
Amazon. Yep.
Awesome. Wow. Karen, thank you so much for being here on the We Don't Play podcast show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. I'm sure some people may want to contact you, connect with you, maybe want to work with you. What options do they have available?
Sure. I'm in Chicago. No death threats, please. I'm done with those. My website is www.karenconti.com, KarenConti.com. And you can email me at hello@karenconti.com. And you can call me at 312-332-7800.
Amazing. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Faber. You take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.